So, welcome to the closing reception of the Gaza Biennale T'karonto and the book launch of the newly released Palestine and Feminist Liberation by Nada Elia. Okay, and then maybe we can invite Nada on the Zoom. Hi, Nada.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm sorry, I have the sniffles too today, so I wanted to say thank you for having me. It looks like you have a beautiful event. I wish I could be there in person rather than on Zoom, but here I am in Bellingham. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I can speak for the room. There's just so many people gathered here for you and your beautiful book, as well as the show today. So just wanted to tell you that. And then maybe we can jump right in. So I wanted to ask first, if you could speak to what compelled you to write the book and what you're hoping people can take away from it.
So it's interesting that this book came about in a very, very unusual way. I actually had never intended to write this book. As you know, it's a translation from the French, and I was approached by the publishers in Montreal, Remue Ménage, a publisher in Montreal, about writing this book of Palestinian feminist analysis. And at first I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm working on a different project right now. I was working on a different book. And I'm like, no. But they were persuasive. I'm very thankful for them for persisting, and they were persuasive, and they said, no, you have to write this book. There is a need for this book. And obviously I agree with them. There is a need for this book. And so what compelled me to write it is basically the argument they had made, which I guess was in the back of my mind, that there is a need for such a book. And the need for such a book is the complete misrepresentation of Palestinian feminism, of Palestinian women, of Palestinian lives. And so I think that one way that I can actually express that the best is, since the book is out now, is by reading just a little bit from chapter 1, which is Multiple Jeopardy, Gender and Liberation in Palestine. And I'm going to do a little bit of reading because that establishes in some ways what the book is about and why I was writing it, why I felt the need to write it. And as I said, I mean, it just very unusual that this is not a book that I had thought about writing. And now that it's out, I'm very, very thankful that I was asked to write it. So I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 1, and then I'm going to stop. And I know you have questions for me, and I'll answer those as you ask them. So I'm going to start reading. Palestinian women and queers in the homeland are often asked by concerned Westerners how we negotiate the challenges of living full, rewarding lives in a conservative society. Those of us in the Western diaspora are asked if we are not better off really living in modern societies where we can wear whatever we want, go wherever we want. These questions are misguided. Instead, Palestinians should be asked, I'm sorry, skip the page. Instead, Palestinians should be asked how we persist, how we continue to live, love, and care in a society that is living under a brutal system of apartheid intent on erasing our very existence and history. Instead, we should be asked how we persist under the rule of law of an ethno-supremacist country that views each and every one of us as a demographic threat simply for being who we are. We should be asked how our youth retain the impulse to be free when trigger-happy Israeli soldiers and snipers are ordered to kill unarmed children demanding their human rights. We should be asked how we continue to build community, nurture each other, and denounce settler colonialism in the same breath as we reject patriarchy. And anyone who is concerned that those of us in the diaspora are better off than in Palestine should stop and think about who the greater oppressor of the Palestinian people is. Israel, which denies every Palestinian their basic rights, or Palestinian society, with its, at times, stifling traditional values, which are often little more than an attempt to hold on to one's culture, threatened with erasure. And they should consider that for the millions of us longing for the homeland, our diaspora is not a choice, but a reality imposed upon the Palestinian people by Israel. I'm going to read a little more. I begin reluctantly with a brief discussion of the Western discourse on Palestine because I believe it is of critical importance to our circumstances, as the question of Palestine is a global one, with close to 80% of the Palestinian people forcibly displaced from their ancestral towns and villages, while Israel, which dispossessed us, receives financial support and political immunity from Western powers. Indeed, the recognition of the West's critical role in ending the oppression of the Palestinian people is implicit in the fact that the liberation strategy agreed upon by the broad coalition of Palestinian civil society organizations, namely the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, hinges on global solidarity by individuals living in those countries that can impact Israel, and these happen to be mostly in the West. Nevertheless, as far as the mainstream discourse in the West is concerned, Palestinian women and queers either do not exist or are oppressed by Islamic fundamentalism with little recognition of Israel's violence, much of which is gendered. The long-standing Western refusal to address Palestinian women's struggles was made clear in 1985 when a patronizing Betty Friedan, an icon of Western feminism with its "the personal is political" rallying call, attempted to censor the prominent Egyptian feminist Nawal Saadawi at the United Nations International Conference on Women in Nairobi, Kenya. "Please do not bring up Palestine in your speech," Friedan told the Saadawi. And in a stunning demonstration of bad faith and intellectual laziness, both stemming from unfettered racism, Friedan explained to the fiery Arab feminist that this is a women's conference, not a political conference. Friedan obviously had no clue who she was dealing with. As al-Saadawi later wrote in a clear articulation of Palestinian women's circumstances, and this is a quote from Saadawi, "Of course, in my speech, I didn't heed what Friedan had said to me, since I believe that women's issues cannot be dealt with in isolation from politics. The emancipation of women in the Arab region is closely linked to the regimes under which we live, regimes which are supported by the USA in most cases, and the struggle between Israel and Palestine has an important impact on the political situation. Besides, how can we speak of liberation for Palestinian women without speaking of their right to have a land on which to live? How can we speak about Arab women's rights in Palestine and Israel without opposing the racial discrimination exercised against them by the Israeli regime?" So, okay, I think I'm going to stop here with my reading for now. But basically, this is what compelled me to write. This is what made me agree to write the book. It's like this complete disconnect by Western feminists who don't understand what the circumstances of Palestinian feminists are, and that we are not, I mean, we want social and political transformation, liberation. We cannot possibly be free if we only overthrow patriarchy, if we don't also overthrow settler colonialism. Our oppression is multiple, and we, no free women without free homeland. That's the Talat statement. It's like, what's the point about talking about Islamic fundamentalism and conservative society? The person denying me my freedom of movement, my person, whoever is denying Palestinian women their freedom to get an education, reproductive justice, healthcare, all of that, that's not Islamic patriarchy that's doing it. It's Israel. And yet in the Western mind, we are oppressed by our culture and not by Israel. So I felt the need to write that. And that's what compelled me to write the book.
Well, my next question for you, Nada, is you write about the role of Palestinian women during key moments in Palestinian history, during the British Mandate period, the Nakba, the First Intifada. Can you share more about the role that Palestinian women play in national liberation struggle and why it's important to highlight this role specifically?
Yeah, actually, that is the topic of the book that I was writing when I was approached about Palestine and feminist liberation. And it's this, my next book. I actually just finished it. I'm very, very proud of myself because I finished it. I submitted it just literally yesterday. And this book is because we always hear about women and children as victims. I mean, every time we hear news reports, including women and children, and the women and children are viewed as victims, and we don't know nearly enough about their role as agents. And women have been involved in politics. Palestinian women have been involved in politics since the days of the British Mandate. And in addition to their political involvement, with everything that they have done, basically in similar ways, if you want, they are just as involved politically as the men, but they've also been taking care of the orphans. For example, Hind al-Husseini, when she founded Dar al-Tifl basically to shelter the orphans from the Deir Yassin massacre, the preservation of culture. This is something also that women have done through our trees, through seeds that we preserve to basically have our food, because of course settler colonialism wants to also criminalize our food, our foraging ways, our seeds, or whatever. So basically women have been involved in politics, and they've been involved through in the preservation of culture, tatreez, oral history, through what I call lamlama, which means gathering up. Women have been engaged in lamlama. We are dispersed, we are fragmented, and the women are bringing us together as a society, as a country, as a people. It's not politics in the narrow traditional sense of what people understand by politics. And it's not politics that has actually preserved Palestinian identity. In fact, if anything, politics has fragmented Palestinian identity. But the politics that the praxis, the feminist praxis that women have engaged in, is what has preserved Palestinian identity. It is what has preserved our culture. It is, and women have played a huge role in that. And I don't want to say only women, because it's not only women. Of course, it's not only women, but women have played a huge role in that tends to get ignored because it's not people's understanding of politics. And maybe politics isn't exactly the word. Feminist praxis is the word, but I tend to shy away from theoretical terms. So for me, I mean, everything is political, and it is political because these women are aware of the importance of preserving society, of taking care of orphans, of continuing the legacy of tatreez, of continuing our food. And for me, that's political agency.
So you offer a clear criticism of Western feminism and the ways in which it has manufactured consent for continued violence against Palestinians by the Zionist State of Israel. As learned from Lila Abu Lovod and other feminist scholars, that imperial powers, specifically the United States, have had a long history of manufacturing consent for the invasion of Palestinian lands, the massacres and dehumanization of struggle. What are the ways in which you describe Western feminism in the book and the impact that it has had on Palestinian people?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Leila Abu Lard, who has a wonderful book called "Do Muslim Women Need Saving?" Because Western feminism always assumes that Muslim women, Arab women, Oriental women need to be saved, and they need to be saved from their culture rather than from Western intervention. So that's the reference that you're making, and again, it's like because Western women, colonial feminists, imperial feminists, global North feminists, whatever you want to call them, basically don't understand that there's two levels of, well, more than two, but to keep it very simple, two levels, the micro level and the macro level of oppression. And all they see is the domestic level, the Islamic fundamentalism, Arab patriarchy, all conservative values, all of these, they see that as oppression, and they never see the macro level of oppression. And by not seeing that, they are working hand in hand with imperialism. Western feminism, at its core is Orientalist and has a distorted view of Palestinians. And as such, for example, it focuses on Islam while completely disregarding the macro level of oppression, which is that, again, as I said earlier, Palestinian women are living under Israeli brutal Israeli military rule, and that is our oppressor. Western women, can mention that there's domestic violence in Palestinian households without analyzing the fact that we know it from everywhere else. Domestic violence increases in militarized contexts, and the militarized context is a result of Israeli occupation. You know, Western feminism, after October 7, is completely weaponizing the still unsubstantiated accusations of systematic gang rape by Hamas of Israeli women. And they're using these allegations to justify genocide as if there could ever be any justification for genocide. Nothing justifies genocide. And yet, these Western feminists are weaponizing these unsubstantiated allegations to justify genocide, while at the same time completely ignoring the amply documented reports, numerous reports by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, by B'Tselem, by Al-Haq, by any number of respectable, trustworthy human rights organizations that amply document reports of Israeli sexual violence against Palestinians, which is a pattern, which is state-sanctioned, which has been going on since 1948 into the present. And I don't want to get into the details, but some of the cases are absolutely atrocious and documented, and the Western feminists don't speak of that, but they weaponize the allegations of Hamas rapes of Israeli women to justify what is basically genocide. So that's the impact of Western feminism on our people. It's like, justifying the genocide. Okay, I've said enough.
So your discussion on Zionism is a critical part of the book. You write, for while the groundbreaking women of color anthologies had opened the floodgates of intersectional feminist scholarship and analysis, Arab women remained censored because Zionism, meaning the evil they denounced above all else, was misrepresented, whitewashed by the mainstream, and made to look, as so many crimes are committed through history by Europeans, as civilized, quote unquote, if not quite civilizing, mission beset by hostile attackers. How do you think the world's understanding of Zionism has shifted over the years, especially the last 2 years of Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza?
So, if we absolutely have to look for a silver lining, I hate to think of a silver lining to genocide because they're really, it's an atrocious thought. But one of the things about what's happened recently is that there's been a live streamed genocide, and that has helped people understand that Zionism is racism, that Zionism is violence, that Zionism is a genocidal worldview, that Zionism is settler colonialism, and settler colonialism cannot happen without the elimination of the native, and the elimination of the native takes the form of genocide. So, and it took what's happened since October 7 for people to understand that, and to understand that Israel has no respect for international law, has no morality whatsoever for anything, really. And I think that more and more people are finally grasping this reality. But I also want to say more and more people are grasping this reality, but not yet the political leaders. Or if they are grasping it, for political leaders, morality doesn't mean anything. Politicians may know what Israel is doing, but politicians are not concerned with ethics and morality. So the people are beginning to question Zionism. And I think it's actually really important to our role, our responsibility as those who know what Zionism is about. We need to understand that we shouldn't blame, because even those people who are like a majority of people who are aware that, oh my gosh, this is a genocide going on, are blaming Netanyahu. And by blaming Netanyahu, you are suggesting that another Israeli leader, another Israeli leader, there might not have been a genocide. But we have to explain to these people who are beginning to open their eyes to the reality of Zionism that what happened after October 7, 2023 is not the beginning of a genocide, but the intensification and acceleration of a genocide that began in 1948. When we speak of a Nakba, the catastrophe, it was a genocide. If you look at the definition of genocide, which has 5 different elements that any one of them alone constitutes genocide, then if you look at what happened in 1948, that was already a genocide. What we are dealing with today is an intensified genocide, an accelerated genocide. And so because of that, we cannot blame Netanyahu for it. What we need to blame is Zionism. So as people are beginning to change their mind about Zionism, we should explain that there's the distinction between liberal Zionism and hardcore Zionism, or, is irrelevant. It makes no difference because, what happened in 1948 was already a catastrophe, was already a genocide. And so we need to, again, use what's the beginning awareness of people who are questioning Zionism and make sure that they understand that it's not Netanyahu. Yes, he's an absolute evil person, no doubt about that. But he's a symptom rather than the cause of what's going on. Zionism is the problem. Zionism is what needs to be discredited. Zionism is not what needs to be abolished. Not reformed. There is no reforming Zionism. Zionism hinges on displacement of the Palestinian people, on genocide of the Palestinian people, on dispossession of the Palestinian people. And I'm talking liberal Zionism, what happened earlier, like the socialists and all of these, that was already a catastrophe. That was already a genocide. So I do think it's very important for those of us who are now aware of the fact that some people are beginning to question genocide, to question Zionism. We need to explain what Zionism is. I think that's if anything is going to come out of what happened since October 7, this is what needs to come out, a complete discrediting of Zionism.
So for the next question, can you share more about your work with the the Palestine Feminist Collective and what you have coming up?
Yeah, so I mean, I think in some ways I've already addressed that. The Palestinian Feminist Collective, we launched in 2021, and we launched with some webinars about Palestine, about feminism. We have publications, but since October 7, we've been doing a lot of panels and analysis and exposing colonial feminism, denouncing the reproductive justice of reproductive genocide that Israel is engaging in. So yeah, as I said, I think I've answered that question. The Palestinian Feminist Collective is a group of diaspora Palestinians primarily based on Turtle Island, and we see it as our responsibility because, I mean, whatever our circumstances on Turtle Island, we are better off than the people in Gaza. And so what is our contribution to the struggle? What is our contribution to liberation? It is educating people here. And it's really important for me to stress that educating people here is important because here, Turtle Island, Canada, and the US are the primary, I mean, among the primary supporters, US certainly, supporters of this evil regime that we see in Palestine, which is Zionism, which is Israel. So we have a huge role to play here in the diaspora in educating people because the solution is going to come from here too. And we are part of the Palestinian people and we are part of the liberation struggle. And our liberation struggle takes on the form of educating people so that they can stop supporting this system. And the Palestine Feminist Collective, which I am a founding member of, basically, we're very, very, very active. We're doing analysis, we do publications, we do webinars, and we have a few projects coming up. And as I said, it's an analysis that combines all the time social and political liberation. We are not in any way trying to dismiss the fact that our culture possibly has some internal challenges, but our analysis explains where those challenges come from, and we want social and political transformation because one without the other will not lead to full liberation, and what we want is a fully liberated homeland, a fully liberated society, and also I hope that we can impact the places that we are in, which is here, the global diaspora, Turtle Island, because we have a role to play here too.
That's actually a wonderful segue to the very last question, which is one of the most important parts of this book is your discussion on Indigenous feminism. What has inspired you to take up this analysis and the relationship you see in the fight against Zionism and imperialism, so in relation to Indigenous feminism?
So I'm going to speak about, Palestinian indigenous feminism, which is like indigenous feminism. It's basically land-based. Indigenous feminism is land-based. It is about collective empowerment rather than individual advancement. I mean, if you think of colonial feminism, it is basically wanting a bigger piece of the pie rather than questioning the ingredients of the pie. And for me, indigenous feminism does not want a bigger piece of the pie if the pie is corrupt, if the pie has toxic ingredients. We want a completely different pie that actually is a healthy pie for everyone. I'm getting into cooking images here. And for me, that's collective empowerment. Also, indigenous feminism is very much a land-based feminism. And so when we speak about decolonial, we need to understand that, just like land back here, absolutely land back here. That's part of the decolonial call. And land back in Palestine too. It is land-based. We can't have freedom. We can't have independence without land restitution, without return. I came to feminism here in the diaspora. I came here as a young student. So my first encounter with feminism, which called itself feminism, was here in the diaspora. And I immediately knew that I couldn't relate to Western feminism. And but also understood by seeing Western feminism that I had basically grown up in a feminist household, a Palestinian feminist household, even though I didn't have the words for it. And that's because it was indigenous feminism that was about land-based, that was about community, that was about collective empowerment, that was about taking care of each other. Again, I mean, for me, the huge difference is collective empowerment, nurturing, what I call lamlama, the gathering up of our fragmented selves, our fragmented people, our fragmented country, rather than individual advancement. That's my understanding of indigenous feminism. And again, there's a tendency to dismiss that here in the diaspora, here on Turtle Island. And so for me, it was very important to address that.
Well, I think that is the end, the interview portion. Nada, thank you so, so deeply on behalf of all of us here for your moving, powerful, inspiring remarks. Yeah, really from the bottom of my heart. Can't thank you enough for
Thank you.
sharing what you
Again,
did
thank you
today.
for having me. Yeah.